Well, it is my favorite night of the week. Welcome to another Thursday evening edition of Waggoner Webcast Live. I'm Brian Bushlack, and wherever you may be across the Pacific Northwest or around the world, glad you could join us for another episode of our show. And look at Mark Bunzel getting ready for another trip. We'll talk about that here in just a bit. Leonard and Lorena, I'll tell you what, folks, we've had some great shows. This may be the best one yet. We'll tell you more about that in a sec. First, though, Mark, give us an update. Where are you and where are you headed?
Well, I'm in Elliott Bay Marina, in beautiful Elliott Bay with the Seattle skyline right off the helm window. And I'm on the boat CMR, which is our mothership for our flotilla. We're going to be leaving Monday morning, bright and early, headed out from Anacortes. So tomorrow we're going to move CMR with the owner, Dave Ryan, and Margaret Palmer, who's first mate on the trip. We're going to take the boat from Elliott Bay up to Anacortes, and then we're going to be at the very end of Sea Dock. If anybody's going to be in the Anacortes Marina over the weekend, stop by and say hello. And then, as I said, Monday morning we head out the Guaymas Channel and make a right-hand turn. Actually, no, we're going to head straight across to the Van Isle Marina and clear customs, and then we'll make that turn and start to head north.
Now, before the show, we had some banter back and forth between you and Leonard, and it sounds like you're not going to try and hit up the Swinomish at all. That's off the
Yeah. The Swinomish Channel, and as we reported in previous webcast, there is some shoaling. And while this boat doesn't draw very much, I don't want to take the chance. I've bumped in the Swinomish Channel before. I think all of us have. Even our guest tonight, Loren, was telling us a story about him finding the bottom in the Swinomish Channel. So we're going to go on the outside of Whidbey Island and then straight up and around Fidalgo Island and through the Guaymas Channel to the Cap Sandy Marina. So hopefully it'll be a beautiful day for weather, and I'm looking forward to getting out on the water. And then I'm really looking forward to heading north towards through British Columbia and up into Alaska. I've been on the phone with many of the marinas, as Lorena has been, and talking to my friends along the way there, and it just gets the juices going. And so I'm looking forward to seeing these places again that I visited before and having some fun.
Yeah, boy, it's going to be a great trip, and appreciate the update there. And to give a preview here, we will have Loren Carmichael coming up in about 20 minutes to talk about purchasing a boat in Fiji, bringing it all the way back to the Pacific Northwest. So that's really the highlight of tonight's show. It's going to be pretty exciting, along with all our usual updates. And, Mark, it's an interesting time. I mean, not only does it feel like, I think March, I think we all agree, it doesn't feel like mid-May anywhere in the Pacific Northwest, anywhere north of the Mason-Dixon line, I guess. But a lot of issues going on right now. And I know the Waggoner Guide, what a project that is that takes an entire year to put together next year's episode and next year's, release. And it sounds like you're having challenges with that.
Well, yeah, we've got an unexpected challenge that I haven't experienced yet. In the 20 years I've been publishing cruising guides, our printing plants are telling us they don't have any paper.
Wow.
And they're saying, don't worry, we have enough paper to print the Waggoner Guide, and we have enough paper to print Ports and Passes. So we put our reservation in months ago, almost a year in advance. But on some of the other books that we've been working with, paper is in tight supply. And I said, well, what happened? And they said, well, some printing mills during the pandemic decided to get out of the business. But the real problem they're having is pulp is going to make boxes, and they're blaming this paper crisis on Amazon, that people continue to order, and there's more boxes going in for Amazon, and it's taking away from the paper stocks. I don't know how true that is, but that's what they're telling us. And of course, with that, they're saying, oh, and by the way, the prices have gone up. So where we've been hearing of inflation around 8%, we're seeing the prices to print the Waggoner Guide and Ports and Passes going up by 30 and 40%
Wow.
Compared to prior years. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, interesting times. I mean, I went to get birthday balloons filled up for my daughter last week, and there was no helium at Fred Meyer. And they said it's because the helium comes from Russia. And I thought, the things you never thought about, even a year or two ago in the pandemic, now we still continue to deal with. So hopefully things work out good, okay there for the Waggoner guides. So lots happening. Safe Boating Awareness Week. Lorena, what's going on there?
Yes, National Safe Boating Awareness Week is coming up May 21 through 27. And as we all head out, it's a good reminder, as you know, cold water really incapacitates our ability to swim or even stay afloat. So wearing a life jacket is very important. 80% of drownings are caused due to not wearing a life jacket. So we want to keep that in mind. Also be sure to wear engine cutoff device when we're out in our dinghy. So if we pull out of the dinghy, it doesn't run over us. Other tips, watch out for logs and debris in the water. Watch out for other boaters who may be distracted or unaware of the rules of the road, the stand on, give way vessel rule. Have sufficient fuel, of course, and plan fuel stops. Leave a float plan with friends or family back home, and so they know how to contact you. Be sure everyone on your vessel knows how to use the radio to call the Coast Guard in case of an emergency. So many things to keep in mind. Weather, of course, read the weather, head out when it's safe, and then checking the vessel, your dinghy and your mothership. Go through all the systems, make sure everything is operating correctly, you're ready to go. Do a shakedown cruise and check everything out. Keep all of that in mind. Have enough of the proper fire extinguishers, check the date on those, and emergency flares or the new SOS distress light. That's very easy to use now, and any day signals that are required, be sure you have all the equipment, spare parts for your boat, and you're ready to go.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's great to get that update. And Leonard and Mark, I want to ask you too, for folks who are newer to boating, the weather, what you do, Mark, in your classes with the weather is amazing. That's a must take class, but I want to kind of take it to the next level with the weather we've had, more precip, cooler. As an experienced boater, is there something those of us that are newer should be watching out for? Is there more debris out there? Are there going to be more logs? I mean, what do you expect to see out there?
Well, I'm always watching flaws when we have a new moon or a full moon. And a new moon is no moon, and a full moon, we all know what that is. Yep. Now that's when your tides are the highest and they're lowest. And as those high tides go up, they wash all the logs off the beach. And if there's no wind, those logs are floating around waiting for you to hit them.
Yep.
And the wind then is good because it pushes the logs against the beach again. And when the tide goes down, those logs get caught on the beach again, just like we see them all the time stuck up there. So when I see a full moon or a new moon, I'm especially watching for logs in the water.
Okay, great advice. Leonard, talk about the latest on the custom vessel reporting sites. What's the latest there?
Well, as everybody heads out, now that Canada's open, of course, the border remains our number one topic, and we still get emails and questions about that. So here's the latest on that and keeping you updated. And that is the 52 Steps Customs Dock. That's out on West Coast, Vancouver Island, in the town of the village of Ucluelet. And 52 Steps is open at this time. So we have confirmation that that's open. It is clearance point. Usually that one does not show up on the CBSA, the Customs and Border Services Agency's website, because it's seasonal. It's normally a seasonal. And our confirmation comes from the Ucluelet dock and the harbor master out there. The other one is Bedwell Harbor, and that one's, of course, in the Gulf Islands. And that one's a seasonal dock as well. And that one, we don't have any confirmation that it's open. As a matter of fact, the word we get from Poets Cove, right, which is right in front of this dock, is that it's still closed. There's some indication, again, there's a clue that it might be opening, but again, we have no confirmation on that one. So Bedwell Harbor is still closed at this time, which also makes some of the other customs docks pretty crowded or might be very popular. And the ones that are open, of course, are Canoe Cove, and then at Van Isle Marina, that one's open, in Port Sydney. And those are probably going to be one of the more popular ones. So ones that might be other options if you want to try to avoid some of the crowds or the delays on that would be the Raymer Point Dock, and that's in Victoria Harbor. And one that we're thinking might be a good option would be the Oak Bay Marina, and that's near Victoria, and it's not in Victoria Harbor, but it's on the east side of the peninsula, essentially. So take a look at Oak Bay Marina, and there's a customs dock there as well. The other one regarding transit or customs is we do have confirmation a boater that needed to go through that had people on board that were not vaccinated. So the question came up: how do people get through that are unable to be vaccinated and or that didn't get vaccinated? And indeed, they can do that. The transit through is still available, and that's the process where you check in with CBSA and with a plan for getting through customs or through BC on an expeditious plan, and then get out the top again. You have to report when you get out. You have to report a number of different things. There's information on our website. If you go search on transit through, the article is about a year old from last season, but that same provision is still there. So you can still do a transit through.
And that's the process where you cannot go ashore. You can anchor to rest, but no going ashore.
And if did I miss anything on that, Maria?
That's it. And you mentioned Van
No, I'll
Isle.
just add, Leonard, this weekend, we've been advised to stay away from the Port Sydney Marina to clear customs because they have a boat show going on in Port Sydney. So it's going to be pretty crowded in there. I'll give you a hint that the Waggoner group bright and early Monday morning is going to go through the Van Isle Marina. And I'm expecting we'll see other boats there when we go through.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, right. That boat show is going on. Okay.
Great. And Leonard, what's the latest on the new I-5 bridge and the Ballard Bridge too? I know, obviously, pretty important bridges here. There's a comment period open, and I know the boating lobby is very strong. What's the latest?
Yeah, so what this is, the Coast Guard is going through a process where the state of Washington, this is the I-5 bridge that crosses the Columbia River down in Portland and Vancouver, Washington area. And they're, of course, replacing the old bridge this is a long-range plan, and they've applied to the Coast Guard for permission for the different plans that they have. And there's there was a comment period. There's still a comment period open on that one. And the reason we voters might want to comment is that the state of Washington, the planners, I guess it's not just Washington, it's also Oregon, that's doing the planning on this bridge, and they keep wanting to lower the bridge. These are the new bridges, this one and the one we're going to talk about that's up near Ballard. They're not opening bridges, so they are fixed bridges, and the height that they choose is going to be the limiting factor on this. So sailboat owners, anybody with a big a large or a tall sailboat should be interested. We're going to put into the chat a link where you can give your comments on this. And right now, the issue has to do with the planned height is a maximum of 116 feet, and that's on the bridge that crosses the Columbia River. And some people are thinking that that's a little bit low, given that other bridges, for instance, the Astoria Bridge is 197 feet. So it's quite a difference on that one. And then the one that's going through the same process with approval and with the Coast Guard is the new bridge that the Sound Transit's going to be putting in across the Salmon Bay and the Ship Canal Bridge, the Ship Canal in Seattle area near Ballard. And we'll put a link in on that one, an article that was posted in the Ballard newspaper, local newspaper. And I'll warn you that the article has a bit of a land-based bent to it. It's basically the Ballard people wanting the bridge to go through no matter what its height or lack of height. So this one is an issue again with When this goes into place, it's going to limit the height on vessels that go under this and go up into the ship canal. So we'll put those in the link, and I think that's about it. There's right now the status with the Ballard Bridge is the Coast Guard had it open for a period. They issued a determination as to the height, and Sound Transit came back and said, no, that's too high. And the Sound Transit has appealed the determination made by the Coast Guard. So keep a watch on that one. There's no comment period open apparently on that one. We'll put the links in the chat.
And from what I gather, this is due to light rail, right? I mean, that's the key driver here. Having lived in Portland for over 20 years, I must admit that they will defer to either what is the cheapest or the most aesthetically pleasing bridge with very little thought about what actually may need to go under the bridge, right? So, I mean, this is a very important comment period here, because I mean, the numbers you just gave us, I mean, that's a huge deal, right? And now is the time to comment, right?
Exactly, right. Yes, this is it, because once it's in, it's fixed, you're done.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, what's the latest on Seakeepers? You talked about this last week, and it sounded like a pretty cool opportunity to have scientists join you and to kind of shuttle them around and maybe actually, be part of the scientific adventure. What's the latest there?
That's exactly right. Seakeepers is an organization. They match scientists with boaters. So if you are boating out in Southeast Alaska this summer, scientists there have an interesting study they're doing this season to identify and record unique vocal signatures of humpback whales. And they would appreciate having boaters, volunteers that can offer ride and housing for scientists on the water. And from what we understand, this is the schedule. So if this fits your schedule, be sure to contact Tony at seakeepers.org. We'll put that in the chat. On June 16th, 3 researchers and gear, they need to be transported from Juneau to Five Fingers Light Station, and they do have an inflatable that will need to be towed. Then on June 29, 2 researchers need to arrive at Five Fingers from Petersburg. July 5th, the head scientist, Michelle Fournier, departs from Juneau or Petersburg to head also to Five Fingers Station. And then July 16th, the 3 researchers that had arrived earlier, they need to return to Juneau with their inflatable and gear. So if you're a boater out there that can help out and would love to host the scientists aboard your vessel, you're welcome also to help out with the science research as well. So again, contact Tony at seakeepers.org.
Yeah, that's a really cool program. Great opportunity there. Thanks for that update. Victoria International Marina Programs. I know Lorena and Mark, you both have some updates here.
We do. First of all, we want to thank Victoria International Marina for giving us the contact to Seakeepers. They actually put us in touch with Seakeepers. And of course, they're a marina that hosts large vessels, 65 feet and over. So they would have great contact for volunteer boaters there. And they also will host smaller boats. If you plan ahead and have a group activity, they can arrange for that as well. They have several different events coming up on May 10 through the 15th. They are hosting the Nordhaven Rendezvous. They'll have some all-size, mega-size Nordhavens there, as well as 65-foot Nordhavens and others. Then on June 8th through the 12th, they're hosting the World Oceans Week Rendezvous. And June 15th through the 17th, they are planning the Pacific Super Yacht Forum. And that's a sit-down dinner with speakers. And I understand they're using Waggoner maps as tablecloths for a fun exercise of mapping out their destinations and routes. So it sounds like a fun event.
And just as noted there, that this is a marina that was built for boats that are 65 feet and over. This is a fantastic marina. If you have a chance to go there, if you're in Victoria Harbor, walk around, take a view of this. And then if you have a rendezvous or an event coming up, they can host this, and they can host boats that are under 65 feet. It's on a permit basis, so on the marina itself has to permit for that. But if you're looking for a fantastic place to have a rendezvous, they can host boats that are under 65 feet.
We recommend taking the foot ferry over to Victoria International. There's a gorgeous view of Victoria City from the marina. And there's a great restaurant next door, or you can ride your bikes along the promenade out there. Really nice place.
So if you're 62, you need a permit.
Well, the marina has to get the permit itself, so it's not an individual permit, but it's an event type permit.
Okay, good to know. Good to know.
And just be aware when going to the marina that it is an active runway right in front of it. So keep your eyes open for landing seaplanes there.
Okay, great advice. Loren Carmichael, a few minutes away. Before we get to Loren, let's talk about one of our favorite parts of this update, marinas. What's going on?
Well, this one is before marinas. That's right here in Washington. The shrimp season is opening up on the 25th of this month for areas 5 through 12. And there's a daily limit on that. And there's a hotline number and a website that to check on the details on this. And we'll put that in the chat. We're going to also a reminder here that we have the Anacortes Boat and Yacht Show coming up. And that starts on the 19th. It runs from the 19th of this month, May 19th through the 21st. And before that, there's some seminar days, and they start on the 17th. So check that out and show up here in beautiful Anacortes.
And don't forget to check out the Waggoner booth. We'll have all sorts of guidebooks available for your cruising season.
Exactly. And then in Paulsbo, there's the Viking Fest Parade event is coming up, and that is on the weekend of May 20th to the 22nd. And that happens it's kind of in the parking lot, right behind the Paulsbo Marina. And that's a street fair that's going to be going on there with food and crafts. And there's a parade happening. And
carnival rides and games. Sounds like lots of fun. It's put on by the Viking Fest Corporation. They do this every year. It's very popular. Lots of fun.
And then for marina updates, we're going to focus here. There's 3 of them that we have. We'll keep plenty of time for our guests here. And these are all 3 are in the Discovery Passage area. So north of Desolation Sound before you get to Johnstone Strait, right in that area. And Dent Island Lodge, that's the premier location up there. It's a beautiful place that was rebuilt recently. And that opens on June 15th. They'll run until May 15th this year. And
September 15th.
On September 15th, sorry. And with moorage and dining and the lodging and excursions there, you can phone and get reservations ahead of time for that this season. Right next door is Fisherman's Landing and Lodge, and that's also a very nice marina with plenty of guest moorage space. They're accepting reservations this year by phone or email. The restaurant is closed. The restaurant at Fisherman's is closed this year. They're doing a renovation on that one, so it won't be open this season. They have guided tours, and they're also in a process of getting permits for fuel dock, which will be a nice addition there. And one more is public dock at Stewart Island, which is just right south of that. You just have to negotiate through some very, very challenging rapids in this area. If you haven't been in that area, there are 3 sets of rapids, all within a very small area that are very challenging at times. But Stewart Island Community Dock, and that's open. It's open for moorage on a first come, first served basis. There's a small store up above that's wonderful. And the store is open, it starts opening after May 20th. And after they open up, they'll have some burgers at night, and they're also doing an auction. We're not quite sure what they're auctioning off, whether it's the boats that they're, no, just kidding. And we're not sure what the auction is, but they're going to have an auction of some sort up there this season.
That's great. Hey, it's a live show, and we have questions in the chat, which we highly encourage. So we have a question. any updates on Long Branch?
Branch, they should be open.
Yeah, we haven't heard
Yeah.
anything on, no recent updates on that, that would indicate anything different from what's in the schedule. And check the Waggoner Guide updates table on that. We keep that posted up all the time, but no, nothing new on Long Branch, at this time that we know of.
Okay. What's the latest on this canoeist crossing Canada and making history?
I will add that I highly recommend.
We got you, Mark. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that Lorena and I have been calling around to marinas, and in general, we're finding that a lot of people are making reservations early. A lot of the marinas are already filling up. If you have a favorite location you want to go to, we recommend you call ahead or go online. Many marinas are now using some of the computer scheduling programs like Docwa for reservations, but it's going to be a busy summer out there.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. Lorena, before we get to Loren, what's the latest on the canoeist crossing Canada?
Yes, well, this fellow, he's 63 years old, Bert Terrahart. He's quite an adventuresome person. He is crossing the country of Canada by canoe through rivers, lakes, and of course, portages. He started out April 1st in Stevenston and arrived in Revelstoke on April 26th, and then went up Lake Revelstoke and is continuing on his journey. His final destination is Big Shippagan Light in New Brunswick, which he hopes to reach by November 15, 2022.
Wow.
His canoe is called Tai Nani, which is Polynesian for harmony between wind and water. And he's basically retracing the steps of the early First Nations people. And you can follow his journey across the country and see a map and photos by going to the website kainani.ca. We'll put it in chat, basically the name of his canoe. And right now his position, he's just northwest of Calgary. So he's making slow but sure progress, and we wish him the best.
Boy, do we. What a journey that is. That'll be interesting to follow. Before we get to Loren Carmichael, can I just say, look at Mark Bunzel. I mean, it looks like he even showered for us tonight. I mean, you're so great there. The captain of the ship, ready to go.
I got a haircut. Thank you.
I know, you look great.
Yeah.
Like you're ready to go.
Thank you. Ready to go.
Going to be a great trip. Well, let's welcome Loren Carmichael now. I know, Lorena, you want to introduce him, and what a story this is.
Yes, Loren has quite a story to tell. He grew up boating, so he's very familiar with boating. He lived aboard a sailboat during his high school years. And then more recently, he's been fishing with his family, including Westport along the coast. And he and his family had a 40-foot trawler and have explored the west coast of Vancouver Island and other local waters. And they decided they wanted a larger boat. So that began the saga of searching for a boat. This was during COVID time, so he couldn't see it in person. And the boat happened to be in Fiji. And he's going to tell us how he got from Fiji to Anacortes and all the trials and tribulations. So welcome, Loren.
Hey, thanks for having me. So my name's Loren Carmichael, as introduced. And if you guys see me out there in the Snapdragon, we're based out of Anacortes, but if you see us out there anchored, we're heading up to Alaska this summer on the AIS. Come say hi, and we're always looking to make new friends. So, and I love talking about boats, as you'll soon find out here. So just to start out, I'm going to start by making excuses for myself because the story I'm going to tell is crazy. But we had a rough COVID. My wife was a medical provider. She actually was the provider in Life Care Center of Kirkland, which was the first big outbreak in the United States. And it was pretty horrific. But as a result, we locked down pretty hard after that. She was really worried about getting this before the vaccine. And my excuse is I was stir crazy because I barely left the house for like 6 months. I lost my mind. But anyway, the one upside of all the COVID was we were using our own boat a ton because all the rest of our social lives had been canceled, and we were going every Thursday evening and doing like Thursday through Saturday. My kid was doing school online. So we were out every weekend in the San Juans on our own boat. And all of a sudden it started seeming like, hey, it'd be nice to have a little bigger boat. This would be cool. And I'm obsessed with boats. So I'm always looking at Yacht Finder. And I lost my mind. I fell in love with this boat in Fiji, of all places, that I found on Yacht Finder. I'm going to see if I can get my untech savvy self to get some pictures up here. No, I got it. All right, so this was our old boat we were spending a lot of weekends on, which at the moment I have a lot of nostalgia for. There's a big part of me that like, oh, I never should have done this. I should have just kept that boat. It was so great. But anyway, onwards and onwards. Uh-oh. Here we go. All right, so shore leave. This was a picture that was something I found online. It was from the original owners, but this was the boat I fell in love with. It was a one-off custom built in 1992 here in Washington. It was built on the Skookum 53 motor sailor hull, or sailboat hull. Apparently they were a popular like heavy displacement full keel cruising sailboat they built a lot in the 70s and 80s. Some of them were like factory hulls that were finished by owners, some were factory finished. But my understanding is they went bankrupt in like the early 80s. And the hull was sitting in some yard out in Port Townsend, I believe. And the people that built this boat found that hull and designed their dream trawler. It was never built as a sailboat, it was a trawler. But they bought that mold in a field, built this one-off custom hull. And then I think they brought it to Snohomish to Tom Nelson Shipyard, who I believe now is one of the guys behind was American Tugs in LaConner. But apparently he had another shipyard previously. So this was built as a custom one-off. The family that built it, they did like, I think a 7-year trip through the Panama Canal and like down to South America and up the Eastern Seaboard and Caribbean. Then they brought it back to Seattle and sold it to a Canadian family that I bought it from, who took a trip in the, I think, early 2000s all the way to New Zealand and back in it. And then had brought it back here. And then we're on their second trip to New Zealand after a big refit in about like 2015. And then COVID kind of hit and they ended up getting stuck in Fiji. You know, New Zealand locked down, Australia locked down, Fiji locked down, and you just couldn't go to any of those countries at all. And unfortunately for them, they couldn't even get it home the way I ended up getting it home because they were Canadian. They weren't allowed to go into Hawaii. So, and that was because of the fuel and the range of the boat. That was really the only way to get this boat home, was to take it to Hawaii and then back to Canada or America. So they were really stuck. So they ended up getting flown out. My understanding was like a relief flight arranged by the British government. They were able to get on at kind of short notice. They got a couple, I think they were stuck there for, 4 or 5 months or something. And then they got notice like, hey, if you want to get out, we can fly you out, but you got 3 days, kind of a situation. And they booked it out of there. Anyway, so they put the boat on the market with a local broker. And me and a lot of other people fell in love with it. It's a cool looking boat. It's got a good story. The price seemed reasonable. So when I was negotiating the purchase, and I think this was true, you never quite know with boat brokers, but they were telling me that 24 different people were like seriously circling this boat, trying to figure out how to buy it. And everyone had the same problem I had, was you could buy it, but you couldn't go to Fiji to look at it or check it out. You couldn't get the boat out of Fiji. Like it couldn't go to New Zealand. It couldn't go to Australia. The only way to get it to New Zealand or Australia was you had to have a captain that was from New Zealand, a New Zealand citizen, that would take it there, but then wouldn't be able to get back to Fiji with it. And so as part of the deal, when I bought it, the broker was able to put out a message on a local Facebook group to say, hey, are there any American captains that are interested in delivering a boat to Hawaii? And she was actually able to find a guy who was a very experienced delivery captain who'd moved to Fiji like 6 months before the pandemic and started a tourist related like paddleboard business at a resort that was just dying on the vine because of COVID. And it worked out good for him because he, needed the money and was looking for something else to do anyway. So I managed to get him and then another gentleman who had been working on ice drilling rigs in Antarctica for researchers, who the Antarctic season had gotten canceled because of COVID, and he'd been in New Zealand for a long time and then gone up to Fiji on some kind of old like historic schooner. Anyway, he was up in Fiji and looking for a next move. So I got a captain and an engineer, and they were both American citizens, which was necessary to make this deal happen so they could get into Hawaii. So I lined that up, and we did a lot of like pictures of the boat and Zoom meetings. As this story will unfold later, I feel like I was pretty badly misled on the actual condition of the boat. It was in a lot worse shape than I was led to believe it was in. It was definitely, it's hard to tell when you're on Zoom. Like you think you're seeing a picture of something, but it's kind of grainy, low resolution in the end. And when you see it in real life, it often looks very different, I found out. But this was a picture of the boat at the fuel dock, fueling up, ready to, before we took off in Point Vuda Marina in Fiji. Another huge challenge was getting insurance for this trip, which was something else I kind of had to line up before we did the final closing. But it was, I talked to 20 different insurance agents all over the world and finally found one that was able to do it. And it was a outfit out of the UK. And it was $3,000 for 2 months of insurance. And it was only good from Fiji to Hawaii. And then the original plan was we were going to try and get the boat, like stay a week or two in Hawaii and try and get it to LA because it was like November. So it was way too stormy to try and get it up to Washington. But I figured if I can get it to LA, I can get it up the coast with my family next summer, kind of the original plan. But then as soon as it got to LA, this insurance company was going to drop me because they weren't set up to insure boats within US waters. Somehow they were only, they could do anywhere but the US. So that was another big drama, but we did get it lined up. Anyway, the moderators are going to post some links with some like brokerage tours of the boat that show the more interior and some of that if you're interested when this is done. So I'm not going to go too much into that since we have limited time, but it's a pretty neat boat. One of the things I liked about it was it had 2 big dinghies on the roof, which was something I'd always kind of dreamed about, having a big fast dinghy and more like a little rowboat centered dinghy. It's, as you can see, it's got a big full keel. It had a pretty major refit in around 2015. They rebuilt the engines. They added hydraulic stabilizers, new diamond sea glaze doors, hydraulic stern thruster. I should have written down a list, I guess, if I was going to list it all, but there was a lot. The guy spent a lot. He also added a sailing rig to it. So it's kind of a motor sailor now. As the story unfolds, you'll find out that was not designed very well, unfortunately. And, he probably spent $100,000 on it, but it doesn't really work. And the roof was collapsing on the trip home. He put a new dinghy, a new steelhead crane, get the big dinghy on and off the roof. He did quite a bit of work, which that part was all as advertised. It just wasn't maintained, and a lot of it didn't actually work for one reason or another. Here's just a couple more pictures. This is actually a more recent picture when I got the boat home, but just to give you a sense of kind of what was going on. It's a big full keel boat. One unique feature that I thought was cool is it's got a Portuguese bridge out front with a full helm station that I think is kind of a cool halfway between the windage and height, all that weight aloft of a fly bridge or just a traditional trawler with no fly bridge. It's kind of nice having that outdoor space without the actual fly bridge. I thought that was kind of neat. Anyway, I fell in love. So here's a picture of, leaving the Vuda Marina on the way out of town. So the trip from Fiji to Hawaii, I'd done a little bit of offshore sailing. I'd sailed to Hawaii and back. So and I've watched a lot of YouTube and been into boats and read a lot of books, but I started looking up like, oh, what does it take? How's this trip from Fiji to Hawaii? And man, there is just nothing on the internet, nothing anywhere. Like it is the trip people do not do because it's 2,800 miles and it's upwind against the trade winds the entire way. So if people have boats in Fiji and they want to get them to Hawaii, they they sail down to New Zealand, and then they go south where the trade winds are going to get, was it east, I guess. And then they go to, I don't know, Tonga, one of the islands way further east, and then go up there to get a better angle to Hawaii, just because no one wants to beat into the trade winds for 2,800 miles. But we didn't really have a choice. It was the only place we could go if we wanted to get the boat home. We also explored like trying to get it to New Zealand and getting it on a ship to ship it home, but it was impossible to, there were no captains that could take it to New Zealand. There were no New Zealand passported captains available in Fiji anywhere. And B, it was like $100,000 to get it on a ship, which was too rich for my blood. And C, the ships weren't even really allowed in New Zealand, so no one could tell you how long it would actually take. And there was a lot of pressure to get the boat out of Fiji because hurricane season was starting in like 3 weeks after I bought the boat. So it wasn't like I wanted to dink around with this boat stuck in Fiji that I couldn't even get to or deal with. So it was a lot of pressure. So we just decided to go for it. It's kind of a very backup. And we thought about trying to stop at American Samoa, which was a couple 100 miles out of the way. And it would have, if it wasn't for COVID, it would have been the way to go. It would have been like a 3 or 4 day trip. We could get fuel, get food, take a little break, and then you'd have a little better angle on the wind. But I did a bunch of calls to American Samoa, and I just couldn't get any straight answers on, it was closed, but you might be able to get in there if it was an emergency, but everyone was on time and hardly answered the phone. And anyway, that was in our back pocket in an emergency, but we didn't end up having to do it. Let's see. So unfortunately, I just took this screenshot yesterday, and they kind of erased the first third of my Iridium track here. But if you can see my cursor here, this is where we started down in Fiji. And it was about 2,800 miles to Hawaii. One thing that was an annoyance that I found out, you can kind of see on this track, it's a real wavy line. It turns out Iridium Go units, even if you buy the internal antenna, that the antenna is only for communicating with the satellites. It doesn't have a GPS and the antenna in the external antenna. The GPS antenna is in the Iridium Go unit. And if it has crummy reception inside your boat, it worked, but it was like, it had like a 5 mile error. So every update was zigzag this way within 5 miles. So it made your track look all crazy, and your speeds would go from 0 to 12 knots to 0 to 3 knots to 4 knots and it was annoying for me sitting home watching my boat crawl towards Hawaii. And then on the second half of the trip from Hawaii home, several times, like my family got all worried. Like I had no idea of this till later, but the family got all worried because the boat stopped on the, they looked at the track and we were going 0 knots, and oh God, what's wrong out there? They must be having problems. And anyway, it was just this goofy error in the Iridium Go unit. But so again, this was not during the time of our trip, but this was just typical the whole time. I think green on windy is about 20 knots. So it was, we were going from Fiji up to Hawaii here. And there's also, because this is just a nonstop trade wind, there was like a maybe 1 to 1.5 knot current going with the trade wind there. So we were fighting the wind and the current all the way up to Hawaii, which just made for a long, rough trip. So, I mean, just the minute they got out of Fiji, it was rough, and it just stayed rough the whole way across. I wasn't on the boat for this. It was the engineer and the captain that did it. And I was, communicating with them by text on the Iridium. And, they were pretty stoic, but they were kind of like, it's pretty rough out here. And I was just home going crazy this whole time. It took 20 days to get the boat up there. Let's see, I got some notes here. I found out way later, like a couple months later, there was some kind of, one of the things that, I couldn't really test anything on the boat. Like there were no surveyors in Fiji when I bought it, because apparently normally they fly them in from New Zealand or Australia if someone wants to buy a yacht, but because of COVID, you couldn't. So there were no qualified surveyors. And in retrospect, I should have insisted on like the captain testing more of the systems and going through everything before I bought it. But I don't know. They kind of looked at it, but I didn't, we didn't physically start every air conditioner, every deal. We did have a mechanic check out the engines and the basic running gear before we left and write up a report. But it was, and then the owner was very, which I understood why, but he he was very insistent that like, I don't want that boat moved from that marina, like until it's sold. Like it's this whole liability issue. I don't know this captain. It's my boat. What if something breaks? What if it spills fuel and the Fijian government comes after me? Kind of worries, which I understand, but it also was just like, we took off 2,800 miles across the Pacific on a boat. We hadn't even started or run till like the day we took off. So it was, in retrospect, I would not do that again. If you're going to buy a boat in a foreign country like this, like plan to cruise it locally for a while and shake down the systems before you take off across the Pacific. And honestly, we had the same problem in Hawaii. It was because of the situations there and the timing, it was very hard to cruise it there and work out some of the problems there as well. But anyway, so they took off. It turns out, I found out much later that there was a little bit of tax fraud, funny business going on, which I didn't appreciate at the time, but they didn't file the paperwork till the boat had left Fiji because they didn't want to pay like a 10% duties custom tax, which was totally illegal, and ended up putting our captain in kind of a bad situation because he had to lie that he was taking the boat out for the previous owners. But he had like a business in Fiji and a work permit there and stuff that he wasn't happy about that. I didn't even know what was going on until after the fact. But anyway, we got out of there. You know, it was rough, but the boat did okay. One of the big dramas on the way across was we didn't really know how much fuel the boat carried. There was a few things, and which is normal for a boat. But like, I guess from that story, like one of the funny ones was I couldn't get a straight answer on how long the boat was when I was buying it. They provided various old surveys and documents and stuff, and various things said 50 feet, 52 feet, 53 feet, and 56 feet. And you ask them, they're like, well, it's Medmore and it's really hard to measure. We're not really sure. I think it's around 52 or 53. Later turned out, once I finally got it up in a boatyard and did my plumb bobs, it turns out it's actually 56. But anyway, there was a few things like that. And one of them was the fuel tanks. The previous owner assured me like, oh, no, yeah, no problem. There's plenty of fuel. It's no big deal. And I think it was like 1,570 gallons was supposed to be our total capacity. But then we got out there and the boat was like 2/3 full of diesel when I got it, which was nice because I didn't have to buy quite so much diesel in Fiji. You know, we topped up the tanks, but we didn't, you know, we knew how much we put in there, but we didn't really know how much it started with. So we didn't know for sure how much fuel was in it. Well, we started getting like halfway across, and the boat's got 5 different fuel tanks, and it's got a flow meter that measures the fuel as you transfer it from the 5 tanks to the 2 day tanks that serve each engine. It's got 2 50-gallon day tanks, and it measures the gallons as you do that transfer. Well, the tanks started emptying faster than they seemed like they should have, based on how much fuel we thought we had and what the fuel gauge meter was telling us. And so then we found this piece of paper on board that had the gallons, and it says UK gallons, which I didn't even know was a thing, but it is, and they're smaller than US gallons. And so those kind of added up to 1,500, about 1,500. So then I'm calling the owner like, hey, how much fuel, what's going on with this fuel? Like, we found the sheet with UK gallons. Is it 1,500 UK gallons? Is it 1,500 American gallons? What's going on? And he was kind of a flaky guy. I don't want to talk too much trash about him, but we don't have a great relationship after this whole sale went down, but I couldn't get a straight answer out of him, and the tanks were filling soon. So there was considerable worry that like, oh my God, are we even going to make it to Hawaii? And then I'm starting to think like, what am I going to do if they're 2 days out of Hawaii and out of fuel? You know, like the sailing rig didn't really work. There's no way they could sail upwind to Hawaii. I'm like, am I going to like hire some ocean going tugboat to go pick them up, or, you know, abandoned ship? Or anyway, that was a considerable worry on the trip over. We did end up making it, obviously, and it was actually fine. It turned out, if you look at this picture and I kind of zoom in on this spot, this was the fuel flow meter that was measuring the fuel coming off of the ray cores, and there's a directional arrow, and it was installed backwards. So it was not giving us accurate fuel readings. So we didn't discover that. The guys on board didn't discover it during the trip. I figured out when we got to Hawaii, and I think that was where the confusion was. But it was drama. I mean, there were some other problems that honestly seemed weird considering how much travel this boat had done. But there was no rails on the stove to hold pots and pans on, and they were, upwind in large, trade wind, ocean waves, and with the sails at least partially up, so they were a little bit heeled over. It was to the point where if they wanted to boil water to make coffee, you had to stand there and hold the pan on the stove 100% of the time, or it would just dump all over the floor. And none of the kitchen cabinets had latches on them, which was crazy. So they got to Hawaii, they had these big paper wedges, and towels and stuff jammed in every cabinet door to kind of keep them closed. There was a lot of stuff like that, a lot of leaks, some pretty bad ones in the engine room that were salt water all over the engines. I'll talk a little more about later, but I'm trying to think. I guess, so that was the main drama on the way over. It was a long, rough trip. I wasn't actually on board, so I can't speak quite as much to it. This was when we got to Hawaii, this was the boat at the Hawaii Yacht Club. First impressions, it was, so I flew over there. I guess it was the day I thought they were going to ride. They actually beat me by about 12 hours, but I was feeling over pretty sweet. I'm going to meet my new yacht in Hawaii. It's going to be awesome. And it was pretty awesome, but it was also crazy. Hawaii was still mostly shut down with COVID, and just nobody in the airport, nobody on the highways, no one on the beaches. It was wild. Anyway, showed up, the boat was just right off the bat. First impressions, Jesus, the exterior paint and rust dripping out all the fittings, and this thing is not in the condition I thought it was. I won't labor on this too much because we don't have all night, but I mean, this is a partial list of all the things that were wrong with the boat that the owner kind of lied or didn't disclose. But I mean, some of these were pretty major. I mean, the generators didn't work, the air conditioners didn't work, the heaters didn't work, the stern thrusters really didn't work. The sailing rig was collapsing the cabin roof because it wasn't built or reinforced right. The electric roller furlers for the sails had bad seals and was completely bad. Radar didn't work. The shore power wasn't hooked up and just had bare wires. And when you plugged it in, it was just bare electrified wires in the cabinet. Isolation transformer had been removed and not working. I mean, it went on and on and on. I won't bore you. We could do a 8-part series if you want at some other point on all my boat problems, but it was, and I didn't find out all this immediately. This was, a process of discovery. Just everything tested to work. It was oh, Jesus, that one's broken too. It was pretty rough, but I got the few highlight pictures. This was in Hawaii, pulling the seized roller furler apart. I built my own press out of parts I bought at Home Depot and pressed the bearings out of this thing. And this was kind of it pressed half apart. This was the interior after we pulled it all apart. Amazingly, I was able to find new bearings and seals at a company in Honolulu and put it all back together, and it worked great. There was a hatch on the back that was not sealed properly and looked like it had been leaking for quite a while, but it rotted out some of the wood, which was not that big a deal, but it also dumped a ton of salt water all over the engines and everything in the engine room the whole trip over from Fiji, and it was a big rusty mess down there. And anyway, that was a big disaster we partially dealt with. It had a steelhead crane that had 8 mounting bolts in it that they'd only used, whoever installed it had only put 4 in the mounting flange, and it didn't have a good way to secure it. So we thought the brake was broken because it was swinging around on the trip over, banging into the dinghy, and turned out 3 of the 4 bolts had sheared off, and the whole tube was kind of pivoting on one bolt, banging into the cabinet sides and trying to rip everything apart. It was these things are heavy. It was a huge job using halyards and jacks and stuff to jack it up out of there so we could redo all the bolts. And we did all this in Hawaii. The engineer guy I hired turned out to be a friend and was super helpful in helping me work on the boat, and actually ended up living on the boat for 6 months, hanging out in Hawaii, and did some work for me when I wasn't there, and then helped deliver it home. And he was actually at my house last night for dinner. But another issue we discovered is that they'd added a sailing rig that was not designed by a naval architect or even a sailor probably. And the boat wasn't really designed for it, but it didn't have a compression post that goes down anywhere really, or to the keel. It was just kind of supported off the side of the cabinets. But we found when it got to Hawaii, all the rigging was loose and the ceiling was collapsing of the boat. So we jacked up used some hydraulic jacks and built this 4x4 bracing in there. That was the plan. That was to try and get us to California. Later on, we never got to California because we just never got a weather window. So we ended up keeping the boat in Hawaii all winter. And we later on ended up tearing out this whole wall and rebuilding it to try and reinforce it all, which still didn't completely work. But it was a valiant effort. The anchor chain was rusted beyond use. I had to replace that. The V drives hadn't been maintained. The zincs hadn't been maintained, but this is like all the main cooling water for the engines has to go through these and out before it gets to the engines. And they were just, packed with rust. That was kind of after we'd cleaned them out, what they looked like. It was a thrill. So this was later on, we decided this side of this cabinet here was what was supporting like under the mast. So I met a guy in Hawaii that had done some wooden boat work and hired him to help me. He did most of the work on this, but hired him to help me build a new wall here. So we ripped out the existing side of the cabinets. He was guy Trip ripping it out. He was also at my house for dinner last night. And we built this new wall, which was 2 1-inch thick layers. So it's 2-inch thick layer of marine plywood. We built all these new mahogany bullnoses to try and distribute that load from the mast, which is above here down. Unfortunately, the cabinets aren't centered directly under the mast. They're kind of on one side of the mast. And on the way home from Hawaii, it wasn't as bad, but it still started sagging. So we ended up adding all this second set of bracing in this photo, like halfway home from Hawaii, when we realized the deck was collapsing. So fortunately, we brought the lumber with us that we'd use for our first brace just in case, and we ended up reusing it out in the middle of the Pacific to prop everything up. This was let's see how, I guess just to check in with the hosts here, I could probably go on for another 20 minutes or something, but how are we on time? Do you want me to wrap up or just keep going, or?
Well, we haven't lost anybody, so maybe another 5-10 minutes.
Yeah. All right. I'll keep talking everyone down. Let's see. Is there anything else?
I mean,
there's all kinds of, I could go on and like I say, I could do an 8-part series on boat maintenance stuff, but I'll get off that. Another big drama though was coming into Hawaii. We didn't have the boat had lost it somehow, even though it was built in the U.S. It had the original U.S. like documentation number had been completely lost and was not on the boat anymore, and the original hull ID number was lost, which I don't think was fraud or anything nefarious about it. It'd just been in Canada and they hadn't used that, and at some point they'd done some remodel and ground it off or something. But anyway, I didn't all I had was a bill of sale and a lot of a letter from the title agent guys that were helping me that we're working on it. And I was pretty nervous, coming into Hawaii with customs, am I even going to be able to import this? Do I have to import it? It wasn't an American flag boat. I didn't really feel like I had the right paperwork, and I couldn't get straight answers for anyone what was going to be required. It was a lot of well, it depends on what mood the custom agent's in. He might just let you go, or he might throw the book at you, or, anyway. I had to hire a customs agent in Hawaii in the end, and actually customs was very helpful. It took a few days to work it out. We did get it all worked out. Something it is doable if you want to buy a boat overseas. Anyway, so I ended up taking a few trips out to Hawaii that winter to mostly work on the boat, and one trip over spring break with the family just to tourist around in Hawaii. This was gearing up so we left in late June for the trip back to Anacortes. This was our big food run. And one of the requirements of finding insurance was a huge challenge. Once I got it in Hawaii, my original company dropped me because they couldn't insure it in the US. And it was, again, just a huge struggle getting insurance. I finally found a place that did it, but I had to get it surveyed, which I was worried about because I'd found all these problems, but it came out okay. And then they're on one other big requirement is they wanted 4 people for the trip from Hawaii to Seattle or to Anacortes, which I was a little pissed about because I wanted to do the trip with myself, the captain and engineer I'd hired for the Fiji trip, just the 3 of us. We were all kind of friends by that point. And I had to pay to fly the captain back to Fiji and then pay him to sit in a resort for 2 weeks quarantining. in Fiji, which was required to get back in the country. I didn't have to pay him his day rate, but I just had to pay for the resort and the plane ticket and all that. But fortunately, it wasn't too cheap or too expensive. It was Fiji. But anyway, so we flew him out again. And then a fourth guy was a relative stranger who I kind of, like a friend of a friend, heard through the grapevine that I was doing this trip and said he was interested. And I was a little nervous about it, but it actually worked out great. The guy was super nice and is a friend. And now he's a friend. And it actually turned out very nice to have 4 people on board. We did 3 hours on, 3 hour off shifts between the 4 of us. So we were each really only on watch 6 hours a day. And it was despite some pretty horrible weather at the beginning, it was a pretty relaxing way to do the trip. So that worked out good. So we took off. The first week or so was just horrible weather. We knew it was going to be horrible, but it was, we had 4 people with all different schedules and places to be. And it didn't look dangerous. We're going to die horrible, just uncomfortable, horrible. So I bet the first 5 days was just like 25 to up to 35 at times, kind of beating into the wind, trade winds right coming out of Hawaii. And it was just like, the boat did great. It was, we didn't feel unsafe or anything, but it was rough out there. Like, it was, the worst part was opening the refrigerator to try. I mean, it was just really hard to cook or eat anything because everyone was slightly sick and it was just so hard to move around and cook. But when you open it, it has a home style refrigerator with a front opening door, and it was just packed with food, as you can imagine from this picture. It was right at the beginning of the trip, and like the second you tried to open that door, stuff would just immediately start falling out, and then you would try and catch it, and it would the door would just start swinging wildly because you let go of the door and start to like try and rip itself off the hinges, and more stuff was falling out. It was just, finally we figured out that you got to have 2 people, and like one guy opens the door and holds it while the second guy gets stuff out of the fridge, and that worked out okay. But we weren't cooking much that first 5 days. Found less leaks. We managed to fix a lot of the leaks in Hawaii, but we did find a few more leaks, but nothing too horrible. Just going into that, with the big ocean waves breaking over you nonstop, you find all the leaks in a hurry. So we got through the bad weather, and right as that was calming down, we had our next drama was we were doing engine room checks, I think every 4 hours. And we had a whole, a bunch of spots we'd marked, and we were laser temp gunning them and recording the temperatures on, the engines, the transmissions, the hydraulic systems, the alternator, the V drives, the shaft logs, all that. So we're just trying to head off any problems. And we saw the port shaft log started heating up here. And on a further inspection, we realized it had just stopped dripping, and it had been dripping earlier in the trip. We checked it when we left, we'd been checking it, and so we went and loosened it. And no matter how much we loosened it, it just would not drip. And it was not getting super hot, but it was definitely running hotter than it had been previously and hotter than the other one. And man, we didn't know what to do, but I was experimenting with it. And I found like if I sprayed it with a spray bottle, it would cool right down and seem to be running good. So we ended up digging through the spare parts, and there was a domestic cold water line right running near it in the lazaret or the cabinet it was in. And I found a T and a valve, and I actually jammed some like paper towels in this valve to mostly plug it up. And then we ran this little water line, so it was just a slow drip on top of the stuffing box there. And we had a water maker on board, which barely worked, but it did work. So we had plenty of water, and we just let that thing slow drip on that for, like the next 12 days or something. And it stayed cool as a cucumber. And I don't know, worked out great until I was able to get the boat up in a boatyard many months later and actually replace the stuffing in there. So that was the first big drama that had us pretty worried for a while, but turned out kind of okay. And then we had a few good days. Well, let's see if there's anything else on my list here. Bad weather, fridge door. I guess one other thing, just if people ever are thinking about going in the ocean or buying an ocean going trawler, during the rough weather, this is something I'd read about mostly in regard to sailboats, but there's a lot of talk about like, you don't really want big open spaces. You want, corridors with handholds and handholds and handholds and walls to brace against. And man, did that rough weather part of this trip bring that home, that like, it definitely made me think a lot of these big trawlers that would be awesome most of the time, but have big living rooms with couches and loose furniture, and some of that would just be treacherous out there in bad weather. And I mean, you can see the crew, especially the first couple of days when people are a little sick and people kind of stumbling around. Fortunately, this boat is really set up with great solid handholds everywhere. But that's definitely, if you are going to do a lot of ocean crossing, something to think about. So our next, let's see, our next big drama was early on, we discovered that there was a bad weld in our exhaust elbow where the wet exhaust, this is water gets injected into our exhaust for the wet exhaust. There was like a bad weld right at the crack there, and it started dripping early on. And I put some of that like silicone miracle tape on it. And honestly, it was probably dripping before this, but because of the hatch I talked about earlier that had leaked salt water all over everything and made this big rusty mess in the engine room, I saw the rust down there, but I thought it was from that leaking hatch. I didn't realize there was another leak on this elbow. Anyway, so it was a big rusty mess under there, but I put some like silicone miracle tape on it, and that kind of fixed it for a day or two. But then I think all the vibration cut that. I think I'd put a hose clamp over it, to like a metal hose clamp, and I think the metal hose clamp cut through the tape and it started leaking again. And at that point, we're just kind of like, it's a big rusty mess. That thing's been leaking forever. I don't think it's hurting anything. Let's just let it drip. It was just a drip, So that went on for a few days, but unbeknownst to us, we should have checked this, but we didn't. There was a transmission fill plug kind of on the backside of the transmission that was getting dripped on. And it's like an old velvet drive transmission. It's a compression plug you can tighten, and it's got like a rubber gasket that tightens it in there that compresses. Well, I think we'd actually changed the transmission fluid and checked it, but we hadn't tightened that thing all the way. And there was salt water dripping past that plug, getting into the transmission, which we didn't know about. So fortunately, we were monitoring everything closely. And at some point we saw the temperature spiking on that transmission and went to investigate, and pulled the dipstick, and it was full of like pink mayonnaise, and realized what was happening. And geez. So we shut down the engine, changed the oil in the transmission, ran it for and then I did this fix on it, which is in this picture, which was butyl tape and some kind of other, maybe some silicone tape and a couple zip ties. And that completely solved the problem in about 10 minutes. And coulda, shoulda, woulda done that a week earlier, but I messed up my deal here. I would have avoided a lot of problems. Anyway, that worked fine till I got home and got it re-welded. But at that point, our transmission we ran it for 20 minutes, pulled the transmission fluid out, changed it again, and it seemed to work fine, but it was dripping we realized that there was a big mess underneath there, which again, we kind of misdiagnosed. We thought it was like rusty water from the rust in the oil spill pads. It was all kind of gross, but it turned out it was transmission oil. It was all kind of bright pink. So it wasn't quite as vivid a pink as we would have imagined transmission fluid, because it was all mixed with water. So we misdiagnosed it. But anyway, it had blown out the seals, having all that water in there. So it was dripping fast. And we started looking around, we still had a week left, and we did not have enough transmission fluid to just keep adding, a quart every couple hours or whatever. So we ended up rigging up. This was a kind of down here. You can see there, we cut off treetop apple juice container. And then we stole the priming ball from our dinghy outboard and put it in there with a big binder clip. And then the other end of it, we stuck in the dipstick hole of the transmission with a bunch of tape so we could jam it in there. So then every hour, whoever was on watch would come down there and they'd check the temperature of the transmission, and they would pump that priming ball to pump all the leach fluid back into the transmission. And we did that for, I think, 6 days, and it got us home. So that was a big drama, though, before we kind of got it sorted out. Anyway, but we overcame. There was definitely some overall, all this stuff are good stories, so I dwell on it. But overall, it was a great trip. I super enjoyed it. It was beautiful out there. I was, as crazy as buying this boat was, and I probably wouldn't do it again if I had to do it over. I did not have taking a trawler from Hawaii to Anacortes on my 2021 bingo card. And it was pretty neat to get that chance to do that. It's pretty beautiful. I caught a ton of mahi-mahi. I caught 20 mahi-mahi and filleted them, and there's a chest freezer on board. So I brought a big freezer full of them home to my wife, fillets. And then after the mahi stopped for a day or two, and then we got into the albacore tuna, and I caught maybe a dozen or more of those. I finally stopped fishing because I was just too tired of filleting them all, and I was out of freezer space too. We just did all the fishing with hand lines off the back. We didn't even have poles, but they worked out pretty good. So that was pretty cool. It was a challenge, especially the first couple days when we started catching mahi. The weather was still really rough, and it was you can see from this picture, I did not have my act together killing them, and just blood everywhere and slime, and it was anyway, I got a lot better at that later in the trip. I found this little cleaning table in the boat so I could clean them out on the back where I didn't get slime all over the entire boat. But I can't zoom out. Here's a picture of the sails, which were, it's a shame because this guy spent a lot. He got brand new North sails. He built this crazy stainless steel mast and boom, $15,000 electric roller furler. He spent a ton of money. It just wasn't designed right, unfortunately. It's got compression issues, but also when we were out in heavy weather trying to use it, the chain plates weren't designed for a sailing rig. They were designed for like a stabilizer rig, and a dinghy hoist, and they weren't strong enough, and you could hear the whole cabin creaking and groaning, and one of our window seals popped, I think probably because of all the flexing, and was leaking like crazy. Anyway, unfortunately, I think I'm probably going to end up either just never using the sailing rig, or maybe taking it off completely, or dramatically modifying it just to hold all the radars and lights and stuff. I'd mentioned it earlier, but this was another issue we had out there, was the ceiling was still, because this was right on one edge of the mast, the other side of it started caving in on us. So we added this bracing out there in mid-ocean. This is the captain and engineer that I hired that for the trip, and myself. The other guy, Jim, ran off so quick after we hit the dock, we didn't get to take a picture with him. And Ronnie Simpson it turned out like I didn't know him at all when I hired him, but he turns out he does a ton of writing for like Cruising World and a lot of sailing publications. But there was actually like a Cruising World magazine on the boat when we bought it that had a feature article he'd written, which I thought was kind of cool. Anyway, super nice guy. He's living in Hawaii now, running a charter catamaran. And Graham and the other gentleman, Tripp, who'd done the wall for me, are actually in Seattle now. They just bought a 75-foot aluminum sailboat through a nonprofit that Tripp started, and they're going to try and fix it up and sail around the world and do a bunch of science nonprofit stuff. I'm not sure exactly what, but it's exciting. So I've been helping them work on that boat. Here was a picture of the transmission when I took it out after I got home. It was a pretty big rusty mess. There it was, all media blasted and repainted and put back together. These are not so relevant to this story, but I've been working hard on the boat. I installed a new Cabola boiler system in it. It was a pretty big project. Finally got it home, and after all the problems, using it with the family and actually enjoying the boat. As soon as school's out, we're going to try and follow you guys up to Alaska this summer, and we're getting a late start, but we're hopefully leaving mid-June. Anyway, I think let's see if there was any other. Yeah, that was, the only other thing I was maybe going to mention, just because it might be of interest to people, that not so much relevant to this story, but one thing I was a little bit surprised by, the boat has hydraulic stabilizers, which I thought, like, man, these things are going to be great. And they were great. They would be great around here, but for the ocean crossing, we found that they worked pretty good, but there's still a lot of hobby horsing back and forth. They don't stop that. But they definitely help with the side-to-side rolling. But they actually slowed you down quite a bit. They'd knock like at least a half a knot, 0.6 knots off when you turned them up. And because especially this trip was so long and kind of at the edge of our fuel capacity, and it was just everyone wanted to get there, and I was paying everyone by, paying the captain and crew by the day, we ended up running them at about like 10% gain for almost the entire trip, even when it was really rough. Just because we didn't want to take the speed hit, which was kind of news to me, I guess. And the sails were actually more helpful in terms of stabilization, because they actually gave you a little bit of speed and helped stabilize things a little bit. But it was something that, and the other issue with the stabilizers is the square footage is probably designed more for the normal cruising speed of the boat. And we were cruising right at the very low end of that speed because, again, we were trying to conserve fuel. So we were only averaging maybe, especially when it was rough, we were probably only going 5 knots, 5.5 knots. And they're just not as effective at that speed because they don't have as much surface area and enough resistance on the water. Anyway, it was something I thought was interesting and would be a consideration if you're looking to cross oceans in a trawler for sure. I definitely, like, if I was using them around home and the fuel wasn't a concern and you were running at slightly faster speeds because you weren't worried about running out of fuel, they're definitely much more effective in the rest of those regards. But I mean, I guess that's about all I got for, unless anyone's got any questions.
Well, Loren, it's remarkable that the previous owner made it to Fiji. It's even more remarkable that your crew got from Fiji back to Hawaii. And I think, asking what everybody's thinking, well, what did you pay for the boat? And what have you invested in it since then?
I paid, I think, like $340,000, which would have been a decent deal, I think, if it was in the condition it was, said to be in. It was not in as good a condition. I feel like I overpaid a bit. And honestly, I'm not sure what I've put into it. I try not to add it up or think about it. I think it cost me around $45,000 maybe to get it home with the fuel and hiring the captains and keeping it in Hawaii for 7 or 8 months. It was definitely cheaper than shipping it for sure, getting it home. I've probably dumped another 40,000 into it since then. But that's including a ton of my own labor. Like, I installed the whole Cabola system myself. I've pretty much done all the labor except for some of the bottom work and yard work stuff. But so, I mean, it's not too bad. Boats are expensive. It's a hot market for boats. But it wasn't like I stole it financially by any means.
Leonard, Lorena, Mark, you have any questions?
Fantastic story. Thank you for sharing. Thanks for your time to walk us through your adventures. Amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know the Skookum hull, and we have a friend who is on our show frequently, Mike, and his pilot house sailboat is also a Skookum hull, and they're pretty hardy, pretty tough.
Yeah, I know Mike. I was 2 slips down from him at the marina for years, and I think he just moved his boat, so he's not in Anchor Cove Marina anymore. But yeah, right. I know him and his boat.
Well, great stuff. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, and have a great summer.
All right, sounds good. Thank
Loren,
you.
we're going to watch out for you. We'll watch for you up in Alaska.
Yeah. We're should be Snapdragon on the AIS. So
okay.
That's great. Well, that's all the time we have. Next week, updates, news from Diane Lander, Commodore of the Classic Yacht Association, the 25th Bell Harbor Rendezvous, open to the public, that and much more. Next week, same time, same place, as always, on Waggoner Webcast Live. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.
See ya.